Hey girl, what you gonna do tonight? I've got my mama's car keys and you've got a ticket to ride.
Hello, and welcome to Your Favorite Flick, a podcast where each episode we celebrate a movie that my guests love. We aren't here to be critics, we're here to be fans. For our first weekend episode, we are joined by this show's co-producer, educator, soccer coach, and all-around badass, Julia Mott, to talk about Quentin Tarantino's masterpiece, Inglorious Basterds. Julia is both the smartest and best-looking guest we've had yet, and totally coincidentally, she's my wife for 15 years. We talk history, violence, comedy, and performance, and revisit the best sequence in the movie several times. Julia's movie recommendations at the end are not to be missed. She bounces off this one in some unexpected and cool directions. Let's talk about killing some Nazis. Well, Julia Mott, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm looking at my notes here. It seems that you're married to the host of this podcast.
Yes, for a long time. He can't get rid of me.
Boy, it has been a long time. That is certainly the truth. But honey, thank you for being on. It's exciting to have you here with me.
I'm excited to be part of this process. I was very jealous of hearing some of the other episodes and wanted to get my own voice in there.
So to start off, can you tell us a little bit about your history as a movie fan?
So, as a movie fan, I grew up next to an art house movie theater. I had the benefit of being the next door neighbor to the Britannia Theater in New Orleans as a child. And one of my earliest memories is actually seeing a re release of King Kong and a re release of Fantasia. And I also saw Talking Heads Stop Making Sense. One of those things is not like the other, but it was the small one-screen theater with the red velvet curtains, the red velvet seats, the popcorn machine. You walked into a completely different world where everything was dark and everything was not quite the real world anymore when you walked through those doors.
So let me ask, when I first pitched you on doing an episode, you briefly vacillated between two or three movies, but you came up with this one pretty quickly. Why Inglorious Bastards?
I think in a lot of ways, it's kind of a perfect example of things I enjoy in movies. And I taught social studies and history, specifically European history, for years. So the World War II aspect is great. I also do enjoy Tarantino as a director, which is kind of funny because I didn't even see Pulp Fiction until I was in my 30s. I remember my parents renting it when I was in high school, and I was told you were not allowed to be in the room for this. I feel like I missed out, and I'm gonna pick that bone with my father at some point about the fact that y'all seriously shut me out from Pulp Fiction. My life could have been more exciting from there on out. But I also really like the use of the Morricone music within it, which is just kind of a draw because it sets up kind of an epic tale. And revisionist history either looks really stupid or it is epic. This one luckily fell into the epic category, so the music feels like a really good fit.
You know how I love that. Morricone is my favorite composer, not just favorite movie composer, but favorite composer. While I know he wasn't actually available to officially score the movie, Tarantino just used a bunch of his music. So it's like he effectively did.
Yeah, there's
Um,
basically very few soundtrack pieces with actual words in it, and the music's kind of an interesting choice because you've got Morricone and then you've got cat people.
as much as you can maybe complain a little about not seeing Tarantino in its original day, one thing that I think was kind of cool for you and interested for your thoughts is that when we saw Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction together, we actually saw them both in the theater in consecutive weeks.
Yeah, it was the re-release and it was amazing. I really enjoyed that. I can sometimes be a little squeamish about violence, but something about the stylized violence of Tarantino doesn't bother me like the way that Saw or Hostel would. It's different. I don't like horror movie, but I'm not averse to the idea of films using violence in ways to tell the story. I mean, I'm the first to admit that The Departed is a movie I'll watch over and over and over and over and over and over again because when in doubt, DiCaprio, Baldwin, and Marky Mark, that's just a Saturday afternoon.
It's funny that you mentioned Hostel in particular, because Eli Roth, the director of Hostel, is one of the stars of this film.
Yes, that was actually an intentional little Easter egg for you, Brad.
Well, it is much appreciated. And our audience is comprised of the kind of nerds who care about directors. So why the hell else would they listen to me?
Yeah.
So I'm sure many people will appreciate that. So before we get too deep, can you give our audience a brief synopsis of what this rather plotty film is all about?
I think you can kind of say it's World War II. We're going in as an OSS band, and if we get really lucky, maybe we'll kill Hitler. Oh, and there's a movie theater.
There is crucially a movie theater. It is also the story of a young Jewish woman who escapes what seems sure murder at the hand of the Nazis to a movie theater in Paris, a city we are not alone in loving.
I was
Uh,
really disappointed when I found out that the movie theater in the film was basically soundstage built in, Germany. It's not an actual Parisian street. There's actually only one Parisian, scene in the whole film that's actually shot on location, and it's like a brasserie in Montmartre.
oh, interesting. I did not realize that. I know in the credits it talks about Paris on location. I didn't realize it was that little, though.
It was one location from what I could tell online. They did a very good job of Europing, though.
So I'm going to go a little bit in reverse order of how we often do
Okay.
things. I have a lot of topics that we can discuss. It's going to be hard to keep this movie to one episode. But that said, as we were watching last night for the who knows how manyth time, you were furiously taking notes. So I really want to start with you. What were some of the big things that you wanted to be sure that you noticed and that you wanted to be sure we talked about today?
I have to admit, one of the first notes that I've got underlined is how did he make drinking a glass of milk look so incredibly malevolent? That, like, dairy products are not generally seen as threatening. And Hans Landa made the milk consumption just look frightening. Like he's a terrifying villain with his sort of patina of social nicety and impeccable manners and language, all as a setup for him to just murder people. It's really frightening to see that kind of veneer, that civility that cracks as soon as it doesn't need to be used anymore.
Why don't we use this as a little bit of a springboard to talk about Waltz in this movie? I don't think that it will be controversial with anyone to say that I find this to be one of the greatest film villains of all time. What makes this character work like he works? Performance.
He's terrifying, and he's terrifying in the way that finding out that your next door neighbor's a serial killer would be terrifying. He keeps to himself, he's very polite. He has all of the trappings of somebody who looks like a, quote, "normal person," and then you realize there's this whole other side that is not like other people. And it's interesting because he actually purposely sets himself apart from both the German soldiers and the Jews in a lot of ways in the movie. And he tries to kind of set himself up as a singularity of being able to do things that the other German soldiers cannot. And it's interesting because he thinks he's doing something so noble, but you get the sense that he also believes some of his fellow Nazis are less than accomplished comparatively to him. There is a huge amount of condescension, although he wouldn't want to show it. It's all about looking. And one of the things that I think is particularly powerful that makes him truly a good villain is his interrogations are not lights in the eyes, punching people until they give in. It's much worse because it's following the bounds of what regular conversation should be. And he just wheedles and needles and jumps around until he gets the answer he wants. He's not asking questions he doesn't already know the answer to.
Like a great attorney, right?
Yeah.
And he is almost Bond villainesque in being downright goofy at
Yes.
times, but he doesn't lose his menace with
That's a
being goofy.
bingo.
Is that how you say it?
Yes. We just say bingo.
Bingo! How fun!
Exactly. But the undercurrent of the menace is always there. And it's funny when you meet people that have that air of menace about them in real life, you get that feeling in the back of your neck. And it's something that you can't necessarily explain why that person feels off, but they do.
Yeah, it's not the same performance. In fact, it's a very different one. But you saying that makes me think of Begbie in Train Spotting, where
Mhm.
like these characters that just the menace is so clear, like, oh, that's a dangerous person to be in a room with.
And I think that what's so interesting is that obviously anybody who has used their eyes to learn anything about history, be it through films or books or their high school class that they didn't pay a lot of attention to, it is obvious the brutality of the Nazi regime. So I think it's a real choice that Tarantino doesn't show that directly. He shows the other menace that they had, the psychological terror that the French people face with the Nazis occupying their country. And that's something that when I was in Paris last time, you see the small plaques all over the Ile de Cité talking about different ways individual French resisted, individual French people died for trying to fight them. And they were living under an occupation where people could be, quote, polite to their faces, but also plotting to have them killed by raiding their homes.
Another interesting thing about Landa to me, I think he cares about being a German. I don't think he cares at all about being a Nazi, other than that they are in power and they've given him the opportunity to do what he does.
Yeah, I think if some other group had been in power, he would have tried to get in good with them because he likes the finer things. He likes the leather trench coat. He likes having attachés and flunkies to do his business. He likes being able to order the good champagne, which is the Perrier Jouet in the floral painted bottles, the nice things in life. He would have picked the path that would have ensured that's what he could have done. One thing that I noticed in this watch, though, that I had not considered is there's multiple references to his ladies' manness throughout it. And it's kind of funny because you don't actually ever really see him with a woman in the movie, but there's references throughout about falling into that honey pot.
That's a great line. And yes, that's an interesting point. There's so much of Rhonda that is about reputation. Is he a ladies' man, or is he just put that, reputation out for himself? He loves being called the Jew hunter, or at least he tells us that early. And then at the end, he tells us, no, he doesn't like that. He's very much a man of appearances, but in a very calculated way.
It's almost like the curated image you see of, like, influencers in some ways.
Oh, interesting.
It is a very specific persona he is portraying, and whether or not all of those things are what he actually thinks of a given situation, he knows which ones are the most calculated and useful ones for the situation.
So, jumping on a little bit, I think of some movies as really being made up of scenes.
Mhm.
But I think of this one as being made up of sequences. And like we talked about the opening sequence of the dairy farm, which I mean, I guess is a scene, but they're longer than what you normally think of as a scene, right?
Yeah, it sort of works with, like, the chapter division that's done within the film for me, like, they're distinct.
And what I was thinking, each major sequence is contained within a chapter. It's not necessarily the whole chapter every time. If I said you had to pick your favorite sequence in the movie, what would it be?
I think it's actually gonna be in the La Lucienne Tavern. I
That's the
think
only right answer. I wanted to give you a chance to give a wrong answer so I could call you on it, but that's the right answer.
oh, well, good to know, I'm so glad we agree. I think that is because it is in some ways the most complicated, but it's also the one that is sort of a linchpin for the next step in the plot. It's like, "Alright, great, we've been killing Nazis, but, now we're moving on to our bigger and better plans of destroying their premiere." We've added a movie star into it, and then you've got the kinda haplessly drunk Wilhelm. I think it's very important that the SS officer is one that was with Londa at some point. Nobody researched that it was in a basement. I think You don't fight in a basement, it's a really solid life policy. It's a singular exit, it's a choke point. It's the ruse both failing and succeeding all at once in some ways. Because, like, the plan could have just been cut off there. If Bridget von Hammersmark dies, there's no chance of getting in that theater.
Right. And we think she is dead at one point, right? Until
Yeah.
she
And
calls out that she's
"I'm
not.
alive!" Sort of in like a rising up, almost Frankensteinish sort of way, really, because she sort of like lurches upward.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah, it especially has like a Bride of Frankenstein
Yes.
feel to it, really.
And
And
that
not
kind of
just because
makes,
she's a woman, but that particular motion.
yeah, she lurches and it's all herky jerky. And you realize it's afterwards it's because she's been shot in the leg. And you actually see the shot in the leg from the way the table's thrown up because the gunshots under the table play a massive role in how the fight kicks off. And you actually see the bullet fly and hit her in the leg. I've only broken small bones, and being shot in the leg seems bad.
Part of the reason I think it's the standout has so many of the Tarantino tropes
Mhm.
done in such an intelligent way. And I mean, part of what makes Tarantino great is he does go back to tropes, but they always feel inventive in how he uses them.
Well,
So,
and there's a clear Great Escape reference with the German 3, with the response of the good luck that the Gestapo agent says as they're passing the checks, and the Englishman replies, "Thank you." But I kind
you
of love the idea of there being like those "you're not one of us" moments in films. It's like that moment where in a movie somebody realizes, "Oh, no, this is not what I thought it was." And, like, so often that's the switch for either emotional action or physical action. You could also make a Godfather parallel to the calmness of Michael outside of the hospital when he's trying to protect his father, where he's clearly in the game and ready for the game, even though people had thought he was just like a soft civilian. But you see his hands not shake as he lights the cigarette, and you realize, oh, he's in the game.
Now, you know that scene makes me cry, so it's not fair to bring that scene up and try to get me to cry on the podcast.
Sorry about that.
The game they're playing with the cards, he folds pop culture references, granted pop culture references of a very different time than he normally deals in, into that scene. It's got his great, both chummy, but then also oppositional dialogue that he does so well. You mentioned the Nazi officer, played by August Deal. He's kind of like Lando without the humor, or at least his attempts at humor are so forced and not very funny.
Yeah.
He's a funny kind of counterpoint, or not funny counterpoint, maybe.
But he's also very astute in his societal criticism because when he's King Kong, he tries to determine if he is King Kong or if he is the history of African Americans in the United States. And that plays to the historical knowledge that the Nazis absolutely were aware of Jim Crow policies and post Reconstruction behavior in the United States, and that they looked to that kind of segregation as some of their guidance. And they actually were initially somewhat aghast at the policies the United States had put in place.
There's an interesting thing. Of course, most Tarantino movies feature prominent black characters. This one, due to the setting, has one, but it's interesting that at several different points, Tarantino works in sort of pointed references to American racism in a movie that obviously doesn't directly depict death camps, but clearly very much has to do with the Holocaust. I mean, I'm interested in how you think that works and why he did that.
I think it's impossible to talk about modern day America and not talk about those issues because they are a day-to-day fact for Americans who are using their eyes in the world. And I think that that actually connects to a lot of the idea that people have about World War II as well. Fighting fascism in Europe, ending a genocide, preventing, people from dying are part and parcel of the idea of fighting for freedom and fighting for justice and truth. And those are the American ideals that we hold, most dear, basically going back to, like, de Tocqueville, and I think Tarantino pointedly shows that there are parallels and there are differences, and that some things are definitely bad, and kind of unflinchingly saying things are bad.
Let me throw it back to you. What else did you have in your notes that you want to make sure we get to?
When Shoshana first meets Frederick, when she is in front of her cinema, when she looks at him and he asks her name and she says, "You wish to see my papers," and you realize that they're having different conversations. I mean, obviously, his power as, a film star can it makes him feel that he can just demand this information of her. But I think he would have been actually okay with hearing Shoshana or Emmanuel Mimieux. She, because she's been living under occupation, felt it for what it really was in terms of like the reality of her world, that it wasn't polite, that at no point is somebody in a uniform asking you for your papers a safe thing. And that asking your name is part of identifying you, part of finding you, and especially if you are in hiding, those are the kind of things that set you out.
I Something I was thinking about with that scene too. He's the young soldier who becomes a film star, telling his own story, played by Daniel Bruhl. And one thing that was easy for me to forget because of the number of times I've seen this, but in that first scene, despite myself, I actually kinda like him. Like,
Yeah.
he's got this sort of aw shucks feel about him that you feel like you're watching a kid in a 1950s television show ask the girl next door to go out with him.
They're living in two different realities, though. They're both in the same place, but they would both describe that experience completely differently.
He clearly continues to think it was this great flirtation, and, I think it's great how the film dually reveals him to be such a creep.
And not just because of his allegiance. There was something else in there too, I think, after her second interaction with him, where she realized he would not take no for an answer.
While we're here, should we talk quickly or not quickly about Melanie Laurent's performance as Shoshana?
She's fascinating in that role. Like, you can't stop watching her because there's something about the way she just kind of plaintively stares at the camera, and it's amazing to watch her live within this French universe and carry herself as a woman who's got a sense of amazing tragedy upon her shoulders. The heaviness is apparent in her physicality when she's doing her day-to-day job. And then you see her also find this incredible reserve of strength for the premiere night, where she is dressed for battle, really. And even the way she applies the cosmetics gives it a parallel to war paint, being ready for battle. She pulls the veil down over her hat like a knight would pull down their jousting mask.
When you mentioned that, like a knight, The Last Duel recently has a
Mhm.
sequence sort of preparing like that. I was actually thinking of Rambo when she gets ready, this very 80s montage of preparing for battle.
I also had a little bit of Irene Adler from Sherlock with her blood red lipstick was her battle dress. Is that obviously this was a different battle dress, because she was wearing clothing, but she knew what she was preparing for.
Yes, there's no doubt at all. I also want to mention with Laurent's performance, because this is one of the most impressive things to me in acting, is she is an amazing reactor.
Mhm.
She can do so much just with a look and her varying expressions in the conversation, which is more of a lecture from Londo, really. She captures the screen without saying a word, which is an amazing ability and talent
The
and skill.
silent breakdown when he leaves her in the cafe is incredibly powerful. She's had to come face to face with the man who killed her family. She can't react. She has to be polite, and she's worried he might have recognized her for a moment there when he said there was something about her, and
Absolutely.
he orders her a glass of milk, which is odd.
But also had to be really scary given the first scene, right?
Yes.
When he asks for milk. So, with talking about that conversation, why does he not kill her or at least try to shoot her in the opening sequence?
I honestly wondered if it didn't feel sporting because he was like, "Well, I'll be able to get her." too easy to shoot someone in the back running from you. Like some sort of weird sense of gamesmanship.
Yeah, I see that. I don't know if I see the too easy part because he's killed people in a turkey shoot already. I maybe saw it more as, oh, here's this beautiful young thing, and now the game is afoot, to go
Mhm.
back to Sherlock Holmes to hunt her down, whether he does it actively or whether he just
Yeah.
expects to find her.
And I think that that is definitely a possibility. I always thought that was kind of weird, but then when you think about it, do we ever see him shoot a weapon?
No, but we do see him strangle somebody.
Yeah, but that's personal. That's actually different, I think, than shooting somebody. There's the rage that overtook him at the idea of the starlet of Germany betraying them was a very, very different rage than his murdering of others. I think one of the only times you see him, the facade cracks.
Of course, he is immediately turning around and betraying Germany himself,
Well,
but
of course.
I
Rules
think
for thee, not for me.
I think he sees von Hammersmark as betraying him as much as
Yes.
anything, and he cannot have that. So I want to come back to some character stuff in a little bit, but there were a couple other things I wanted to be sure to hit. You mentioned the chapters, and people often, and I will say sometimes to a fault, people talk about movies as having a 3-act structure. Here, Tarantino specifically gives us 5 chapters, which I think we can pretty much say is synonymous with giving us 5 acts.
Mhm.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's structural storytelling pretty intentionally. And you have to build. I'm not saying it's a Hamlet parallel, but I'm saying that structurally, almost everybody's dead in the end.
It's hard to not think of Shakespeare when we think of a 5-act
Yeah.
structure. He is he delivering us a Shakespearean play here that is comma tragia history almost.
When you think about it, Shakespeare definitely did not tell the most accurate versions of history in his own history plays.
True.
And so much of it's in the eyes of the beholder. I do think, though, that there are some really interesting parallels between this film and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I think the idea of changing the ending and changing the future is something that you could argue that shows up in a couple of Tarantino's works. Like that, especially with a historical setting, there's an option to take a different path. I mean, Jackie Brown has options to take a different path.
Can you remember the feeling of seeing it in the theater, the moment when you realize that, oh, this is gonna be ahistorical in the ending? Well, I mean, it's ahistorical, but you know what I mean, that it's going to end the war.
I'm pretty sure the reaction was, oh, kind of like screeching stop in my brain. It's kind of interesting to me. I believe in the film, Waldo says, sounds like shit. What else we're going to do? Go home? Like, what were they going to do when they didn't have another option? Because I'm pretty sure you get the chance to kill Hitler, you take the chance to kill Hitler.
I remember it being a holy shit moment for sure, but also just how triumphant and vindicating it was, and,
Oh, it was
like,
amazing.
in a very positive way, kind of this wish of, "Oh, wouldn't this have been better than him, getting to commit suicide,
Hmm.
if
Like,
he had been,
though I kind of wanted the flamethrower from the other film.
but then we would have spoiled it, and we wouldn't have gotten the flamethrower in Once
Yes,
Upon a
but I'm pretty
Time,
sure
so
the flamethrower was about killing Hitler in a movie in that movie.
where does this one fall? Is this pro-war? Is it anti-war? Is it something more complicated than either of those designations?
I think it might be pro-humanity. And which is funny to say for a movie with a lot of carnage. The good guys win in the end. It's not a clean win, but it's a win. Their sacrifices aren't in vain, and there's something really hopeful about a story that even if it has parts that are heartbreaking and gut-punching in terms of loss, is still ultimately hopeful that things can be better. And I think that that's kind of an interesting it's sort of a perspective that I hadn't considered about this movie. I think it probably doesn't like war as a concept, but knows that some battles need to be fought, that there's things you can't stand by for. That is like reflected in the idea of we don't want the Nazis to take off their uniforms. We don't want them to be able to blend in. We want them to stand out in a crowd when it's not practical for you to keep wearing that same uniform every day. So we got to give you something else to remember us by. There's a brutality, obviously, but with a bit of restraint, too.
Yes, and in an interesting way, Tarantino, I think, rightfully gets tagged with glorifying violence sometimes. And I think there is glorified violence in this. There also is pretty brutal violence, like seeing the scalping.
I
You
was gonna
mentioned,
go with going yard on somebody's head.
yeah.
Teddy Williams.
A quick aside, but what a lovable goof Eli Roth is in this as the Bear Jew.
The violence in the theater itself is kind of gleeful with the machine guns,
Yes,
but it also is a really great shot of panic through the crowds and everything. What happens in a crowded room if you can't get out? And then you've got the almost ghostly specter of Shoshana's face rising through the burning screen, taunting them. The gates of hell have opened to swallow the prominent Nazis into it.
that's a great description. It really does. It feels
Mhm.
like Hieronymus Bosch in a sense of
Thinking about the Rodin doors.
oh yeah, yeah.
Like, because of the limbs and the pulling and the scrambling and the trying.
Yes, very much so. I'm glad my art history oriented wife can bring some art to this podcast.
Gotta class up the joint.
So, what else on your list? Anything else you wanted to make sure we hit?
I was thinking about the fact that there's small little things that are just absolutely hilarious in this movie. It's about fighting the Nazis. They're going to try to set everybody on fire in the end. That doesn't lend you to thinking it's going to be like super jovial in places. And some of the humor is, of course, really, really dark. Just the way that the actors choose to portray some of their interactions. The cameo by Mike Myers is fabulous.
A nearly unrecognizable Mike Myers, I would say.
Well, and I like that you've got Churchill sitting right over there, who's basically mute, and you actually wonder if Fassbender's character is having some sort of hallucination that we don't know about at first until he finally speaks.
Yes,
The,
absolutely.
the idea that they're sending in a film critic, and you don't
But
really know why at that point either, because they haven't specifically talked much about the premiere and how he'd be going with von Hammersmark.
you know what strikes me, building on that scene? Wilcox, as played by Michael Fassbender, he's just an idiot.
Yes.
Like he really and it's funny to say I hadn't clocked that so much before, but it's not just the thank you or the giving the hand signal. Throughout his interactions, he's the proper gentleman boob.
He's an
A-
amateur.
yes. I think of Remains of the Day as you say that. When Christopher Reeve's character tells them that politics are no longer the realm of the amateur.
Mhm.
And it strikes me that in a Tarantino film, if somebody seems a little too perfect, you really can't trust their competence.
It seems like he's antagonistic in the wrong ways within the bar. He knows his accent is weird and he keeps talking. Why don't we let Stieglitz talk? I mean, mostly he grunts, I understand.
I really thought about watching it last night. Why not finish the drink, maybe have two once the other Nazi joins the table, and then
Yeah.
say, "Oh, we need to take our leave,"
Yeah.
rather than asking him to leave the table.
You
You
can
know,
raise your eyebrows suggestively if you need to feel like there's a reason you're leaving. Like, there's lots of reasons. Why did they decide mountain climbing was the lie to go with? Falling down the steps would have been more accurate.
especially because you get the impression that Londa knows her well enough to know that she wouldn't be mountain climbing.
I am pretty sure if I told somebody I broke my leg mountain climbing, they'd be 100% certain I was lying because I'm not going to go climb a mountain. Like, I just won't.
That's a fair assessment of yourself.
So, one thing that I would like to talk about is Pitt's performance.
Okay, absolutely.
Well, I've seen a lot of Brad Pitt movies being a woman of my age. Legends of the Fall started this. People thought he was really pretty in the 90s, but he's actually pretty hilarious. And there's aspects in this where he makes the aside comment. He doesn't even truly chew the scenery. He just kind of gnaws on the door jamb a little bit. He's just having a little bite here and there. And it's letting the group more effectively all interact. Sometimes
Right.
it's BJ Novak's big eyes just staring at you, being like, I know.
In the latest episode that we've dropped, Midnight Run, Brad and I talk about how in that movie there isn't a traditional straight man, funny guy
Ugh.
relationship. Both the main characters function as both in certain ways. And here, I think there's a degree to which Pitt is playing a very funny straight man, where he is
Yes.
setting the table a lot, but he's also hilarious.
And I think that works with kind of the mystique of him being the leader of this band of miscreants, this informal, possibly bizarrely trained group, because apparently we've gotten totally okay with baseball bat executions. So, to reference The Godfather again, when you initially see the bastards in the tunnels in the woods, it kind of gives the same feeling of them being all stood around for protectiveness that you get when you see, them going to the house in Sicily with all of the guards to protect it. And it's like, what's in this tunnel that they're protecting? Nothing really, but that's their piece of forest at that point. So there's sort of a Robin Hood and his band of merry menness about it as well.
I have never thought of that before, but very much a Robin Hood parallel with that scene in particular, but with the bastards in general.
I mean, in that case, I think the bear Jew is Lil Jon.
Oh, I think he has to be, right?
Is Will Scarlet BJ Novak?
Uh, I think that tracks.
Yeah. I don't know if Robin Hood had an enforcer, but there's one of those 2.
A funny thing with the bastards, I will admit I had to look this up, but I clocked something that I hadn't clocked before. In Hitler's offices, there's a portrait being painted of him throughout the movie that we
Yeah.
we see multiple times. And we can see the artist mostly just from behind. And I thought to myself, this looks like the most un-Hitler ideal looking guy ever. He's got a big bushy head of hair. It's clear that he's not very tall. That is Sam Levine, who also plays Hirschberg. He's dual cast. And it was very much apparently an intentional joke of we're going to get a person who reads as very Jewish to be the artist working on Hitler's
Oh,
portrait.
wow, I didn't know that. That is great, and I wondered when watching it, why is this guy even being shown?
There were two other Easter egg performances. I would say one more Easter egg than the other. I think the Samuel L. Jackson one is fairly obvious that
Mhm.
he does the narration of two
Yes.
cutaways, the Hugo Stiglitz narrative, and
Mhm.
then the nitrate film. How do those two sequences work for you? Because they take us out of the formalism a little bit.
I love the nitrate film. It kind of brings me back to the idea of being a student and hearing, "And this is why you must have laboratory safety."
I love the Hugo Stiglitz because the original that didn't really base this on, it was really an exploitation film, and that Hugo Stiglitz section has such an 70s exploitation feel
Mhm.
to it.
Well, and that makes a ton of sense because you've got a bombastic story, and that absolutely even the font they use for Hugo Stiglitz is different because he has made a brand out of taking out officers.
Very much so to a to a ridiculous but totally satisfying degree.
So if you want to loop back to the bar in the basement scene again, one thing that I noticed last night was they stopped translating the German at some point when Wilhelm and Bridget Van Hammersmark are sort of arguing with each other.
There are a lot of interesting choices with subtitling in this movie. Why do you think that is in that case in particular?
I think we knew exactly what they were saying without actually knowing it. You idiot, we're not getting out of here alive. Well, if I let you go, they're going to shoot me. You signed that for my son knowing you were a traitor? There's all sorts of kind of bizarre, but not really plot driving arguments that could happen there. When the use of various languages throughout that scene, you've got the French and the German and an Englishman.
And I thought about that. Although, of course, understands some German, but little enough that he needs a translator when he's talking to Germans. So that's probably with him being right above the way the conversation sounds to him, right? Like he doesn't fully, and he doesn't even have the context that we have. A neat sort of hero trick to end that scene. If Aldo comes down, he's going to kill him, right? He's promised not to, but he has to kill him. To have Van Hammersmark do it instead kind of lets our hero off the hook for that. Not say
Mhm.
he's our only hero, but that he makes that promise and then he doesn't have to break the promise because
And
she
Aldo doesn't have personal beef with the guy the way that Bridget von Hammersmark might.
right, and she hasn't made any promise to him, and she's been shot by Nazis at this point.
She might have some strong feelings about shooting Nazis back.
All right. Well, like I said at the beginning, we were only going to get to so much of this movie. I do want to visit what we always try to visit at the end. For fans of this movie, what are some others that you would recommend to them?
So for fans of this movie, I'd recommend Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance.
Oh, interesting one. Tell people a little about that because it may not be as well known to many.
It is a fascinating Korean thriller.
It's Park Chan Wook.
And it's part of the Vengeance trilogy. The only thing it has to do with Old Boy, and I will go on record that I actively don't like Old Boy, but I actively enjoy this movie. It deals with a kidnapping and a path of vengeance that follows after it. It sort of falls right in line with a little bit of the caperness. It is brutal, but it's also a tremendous amount of can't look away from the screen. It's got everything from do you need a kidney to child kidnapping to metal factories. And you see the complete arc of society from the business class all the way to the lowest of the low.
That's a great call out. That didn't even pop into my head. I love when I'm surprised by these. Any others?
I'd also suggest Shutter Island.
Oh, interesting. One I know you love.
Well, A, more people should like it. And B, it tells the story in a convoluted way that really feels like something that could go along with this. It's not about war. I don't want to spoil too much, but it's a thriller with a great twist. I have one that's a little bit silly. I think Eurotrip is definitely worthwhile for anybody of the millennial age group. Just the scene in the theater where they're saying "scusi, scusi" reminded me immediately. I was like, well, the train ride, obviously, and thought that everybody could use that in their life. And then finally, the 400 blows, because I think a little bit of French New Wave is something that you should get in there, because the idea of a young person kind of running around the streets of Paris is a great parallel to the experiences of the soldiers. And 400 blows is going to be post-war, so you're going to see some of the remains of the destruction that was wrought.
Those are all terrific suggestions. 400 Blows is like a top 10 movie for me of all time. My favorite Truffaut, and Truffaut is among my favorite directors. So mine might be a little bit more on the nose, which now I feel kind of bad about. Dirty Dozen and Kelly's Heroes are probably the two most immediate inspirations for this movie. Great Escape in there too, but Dozen and Heroes being more about kind of the ragtag squad behind the line.
Could have gone with the Suicide Squad, too.
The second one, the James Gunn directed one,
The
right?
James Gunn one, let's be clear.
I always forget which is Suicide Squad and which is the Suicide Squad.
The one with James Gunn.
And then the other one I thought of, well, the trilogy in general, but The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in particular.
Okay.
The Morricone score, the tense standoffs, the operatic quality to it. It is clear throughout his films that Tarantino just loves Sergio Leone, the director. But I think you'll see a lot of the DNA of that movie in this one.
I think some of the up-close shots you see on the actors in Tarantino films absolutely have a root in the Sergio Leone Westerns where you get, like, the profile shot.
Absolutely. And Sergio Leone, another one that valued stillness a lot of the time, used stillness as an amazing counterpoint towards action and violence. All right, Julia. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been fun. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And I'll see you as soon as I walk into the other room here.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye. That's it for this one, folks. Hope you enjoyed yourselves. I'm Brad Glazer. I host, produce, and edit the show. Julia Mott is my co-producer. The music you heard at the beginning of the show and are hearing now is by my friend Richard Bates and his band The Hun. That's H-O-N-S. From their great album To Skyward. You can find The Hun's music on Bandcamp. We'll throw up a link. Coming up on Wednesday, we're going back to the 80s for An American Werewolf in London with my friend Paul Sparacello. The Nazis in that one are actually werewolves, so that's a bit of a twist. Please follow, rate, review, subscribe, all the things. You can follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky at Your Favorite Flick, on Letterboxd at Favorite Flick, or shoot us an email at yourfavoriteflick@gmail.com. Huns, take us out.
If I spend my days working for a dream, even one with higher rate of success.